me back to the beginning of autoimmune issues for you.
Yes. So when I was 29 years old, I woke up with a backache and could not think of an injury. I was an avid runner at the time, so I thought maybe I needed new running shoes. Bought some, didn't help, tried a Pilates class, bought a new mattress, and with time, the back pain got worse and worse, and saw a lot of doctors and chiropractors, and no one could figure out or have any explanation for what was wrong with me. At the time, being in ministry, our church was going through some very, very difficult things. You know, when your church and your pastor are at odds, the family of the pastor really bears a lot of pain in silence. And I dealt with the stress of our difficult ministry in a way I really had no control over. My body took the brunt of it, and I began to have more strange symptoms pop up, a lot of anxiety and something called brain fog. I had trouble thinking clearly, didn't trust myself to drive very long distances. I stopped sleeping at night because of the pain. I would lie down, sleep about 3 hours, and almost every single night just wrenched awake in just debilitating pain. This went on for about 6 years. Could not figure out what was wrong with me. And during the adoption of our second son, we entered into a very difficult adoption, just very quickly went off the rails. And we had an attorney who'd been an adoption attorney for 30 years, and he'd only had one other case like ours. We were in court for almost a year, and every day we were faced with the possibility of having to give our son back. And it was traumatic and very difficult as a mother who already loved this baby to fight for him, to do what we thought was in his best interest. And I got sicker and sicker and sicker. I developed an eye condition on a trip to court. Court was 7 hours away. It was in another state. I have a 7-year-old and an infant at the time, and I couldn't see very well on this trip. Had a really bad headache. Everything was very foggy, and when I got home, I saw an eye doctor who looked at me and said, "You have a systemic disease, and you need to get some genetic testing done." And I did not know what he was talking about. And he called me after my appointment and said, "I think you have a disease called ankylosing spondylitis. I want you to Google it." So I did, and I wept. I was 36, and I had been living with every symptom for about 7 years at that point. And just like that, I had a diagnosis, I had genetic testing done, and found a path to some healing. Went into remission for about 4 years. Went out of remission for a year, went back into remission for a year, and I have spent the better part of the last 2 years in excruciating pain. I have only recently gone into remission again, and it has tested my faith like almost nothing else. When you're laying awake in the middle of the night, well, not laying because you can't lie down, you're pacing the floors, you are alternating heat and ice, and you know that it's a disease that has no cure. You know that untreated, and if it continues to rage, it will fuse your spine together with time into a permanent forward curve, and eventually your spine will break. And when you feel the pain night after night, you think of all the what ifs that could happen. And I had a good long bout of about 6 months where pain was worse than I've ever experienced in my 12 years of having this disease. And I would sit on my couch with heat and ice and watch the sunrise in the mornings. And it was just me and the Lord, and me asking all my questions about how can you love me and let me live with this? And every morning I would open my Bible and pore over the Psalms and 1 Peter and Colossians and ask my questions, and I would watch the sun come up. And every morning, he gave me just what I needed to get through the night, to get through the day, just that day, just that night. It was like manna. It really did seem like I could not rely on what he would provide the next day. It was just today. And I knew that it was possible to get into remission at some point with different kinds of treatments, but you always know, like, getting into a flare-up is, with any amount of stress, you're going to be triggered right back into a flare-up. And I knew that any type of healing I might receive could really only be temporary, probably. During that time, a close friend of mine went to be with the Lord after a long battle with cancer, and I have never pondered the resurrection like I did then. Dealing with chronic pain and having a friend who's with the Lord, the idea of a new body that never gets sick and that never hurts is indescribable. And for the first time in my life, I think I really grappled with my mortality and begun to long for heaven like never before. And I think when you're really young, you think you're invincible, you don't want to miss out on any of life's experiences. But when you bring pain into the equation, I don't know, pain changes you and it can make you really bitter. Or it can be the thing that keeps you very near the Lord's side and remind you that this is not all there is, and that my disease will not have the final say over my eternity. And in some ways, while I hate having a chronic pain disease and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, I'm so thankful that the Lord has deemed it necessary for me to have to call out to him on a daily basis. Because I don't know if I knew I was needy before having a disease that causes pain. But when you need grace just to get through the day or the night especially, you realize just how needy you are and how weak, and that you need the Lord to sustain you. You need his word to feed your soul. You need prayer. You need to breathe in prayer and breathe out prayer. And it's good to be needy. It's good to need him. It's good to realize, you always need him. On your best days, you need him. On your worst days, you need him. I don't want to relive the worst days, but there is an intimacy with Christ that you experience when you realize just how desperate you are for the giver and sustainer of life just to sustain you through the night. It's not a bad thing.
We got back to the room last night, and I said to my wife, I said, we come to events like this often in the mix of the program, and so we're worried about details and stuff. And I said, were you ministered to tonight by any of what happened? And she said, honestly, I'm still mad at God that Johnny wakes up in the middle of the night and is crying out and nobody's hearing her. And I'm thinking, how do I defend God as being a God of love when he could have prevented that? He could have kept that from happening. You felt that, right?
Absolutely. When Johnny talked about crying out those verses, the biblical promises, and especially when she talked about testing them, like I found them to be true because I have tested them, and she was quoting that verse from Psalm 119, I really get that. Because you can say you believe a lot of things about God's goodness, but when you see that he is still good to you in your suffering, like you just know it in your bones. One of the things that I really challenged myself last year when I was really struggling with pain, I'm going to look for the ways that God is loving me in this, even if it's not in a reduction of pain. Because I know that he's good. My theology and my belief about Scripture tells me that he is good, but I'm having a little trouble seeing it. So I need to look for it. And I asked him to show me, and he did in a myriad of ways, one of which was through the grace and kindness of my church. I had not spoken about my pain publicly. A friend from church rebuked me for that very gently, very lovingly, rebuked me. And so I asked for prayer during our corporate prayer time on a Sunday morning, and I just blubbered through the entire thing. And they immediately gathered around me and laid hands on me and prayed for me. And I had calls and texts. Can we bring you dinner? Can I take your kids for an afternoon? Is there anything I can do to help alleviate pain? Or can I give you a time to take a nap? Can I clean your house for you? And having tangible love from God's people like that, it was God loving me in my weakness and in my pain. And every morning I would get up, like I said, and watch the sun come up because I'd been up much of the night, and I'd look through the scriptures for what does God say about who he is and how he loves his people. And one of the ways he really loves his people is by being with them, being present. And I might have been alone in my house, awake when my family slept, but the Lord was never asleep. He was always with me. And passages about suffering took on such deep meaning and tasted sweet, much sweeter than they had before. And so those promises of Scripture about the Lord's love for you, his everlasting love, his kindness, his care, I mean, they're true. They're all true. And I find them to be tested the most in suffering. And you come out on the other side and it's all true.
How do you guard your heart from the envy that comes when you look at people living pain-free, carefree, happy lives, complaining about some triviality while you're dealing with chronic pain and suffering?
Sometimes I do get a little jealous if someone complains like, oh, my back really hurts. What I want to say is, do you have a disease fusing your spine together? Because I do. If you want to talk about back pain, like in my flesh, I really want to say that. But my mom has always said to me since I was a little girl, if we all piled up our sufferings on a table together and we looked around at what each person carried, there's a good chance we'd pick up our own sufferings and leave the room with them. And I just think that everyone is suffering in some way, or they will at some point. And in God's sovereignty and in his kindness and in his specific love for me, he has deemed that this kind of trial is best for my sanctification. And so while I do feel jealous of people who can run, I can't run anymore, who sleep all night. I mean, the idea of sleeping all night every night, just, I can't even fathom that. I'm so jealous. But I know that he has taught me to pray in the night. He has increased my faith through prayer in the middle of the night. I just have to trust him with that. If I, as a believer in Jesus, I have trusted him. I have staked my entire eternity on what he has deemed as good and right and true. So if I can trust him with my eternity, I can surely trust him with today. And so I have to trust that he is right. And, you know, sometimes I turn over at night and I see my husband sleeping so peacefully and I get so jealous. But my husband has his own sufferings that the Lord is using to sanctify him. And the Lord knows us the best. He created us. He knows what we needed. He knows what will keep us near his side. And so that's what I comfort myself with.
Are you able to experience joy in the midst of suffering?
I was just talking with a friend about this last night who's grappling with a very serious diagnosis. And a lot of times the joy is after the fact. You know, it's after the long night of pain. In the middle of the night, I feel a little desperate. And my prayers are more like Psalm 13, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? But in the morning, my prayers are more like, great is your faithfulness, because you kept me through the night. And so I really want that joy in the midst of trials, like that James talks about, count it all joy when you experience trials of various kinds. I want the joy in real time. And I do think that's possible. I do think I've experienced it at times. I am still, I think, in the part of sanctification where I see the joy more clearly in the morning. I know the Lord is with me in the dark, but joy comes in the morning, and that's when I see it most clearly.
For those of us who have friends who are experiencing chronic pain, tell us what not to do.
Number one, don't offer all of your medical advice. When someone has a diagnosis or they have been dealing with pain, they've tried everything, you know. And I always try to remember that people, they mean well. They really, really do. So I try to extend some grace there. But don't try to offer a medical solution. And don't use scripture necessarily to try to make them happy about their situation, because the Bible gives us room to lament our sorrows, but sometimes we don't. We don't give people room to lament a diagnosis that's life-changing. We want them to buck up and remember all things work together for the good of those who love God. And so that verse is true, Romans 8:28, for all things work together for the sake of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. He works things together for good. He absolutely does. That is a true verse. But I think as believers, we're quick to offer that as a Band-Aid. And what we need to do is enter into the suffering of those who are suffering and hold their hands and pray that the Lord will work this for good in their life and that they would see him do it and that they would be encouraged when he does. You can offer scripture like a balm or like a hammer. And so when you are seeking to encourage someone who's suffering, be a balm. Offer to help. Can I bring you a meal? Can I relieve some pressure so that you can rest? One of the ladies in my church last fall gripped my shoulders after that church service where I asked for prayer. And she said, I can't believe you didn't tell me you were dealing with this. I'm coming to your house and I'm going to clean it. And so I just loved her for that because she had a very practical solution. She can't make my pain go away, but she can offer a very tangible love of Christ like that.
Do you imagine, well, first of all, is there any hope for anything other than long stretches of remission for you?
No. I will not die from my disease, but I will die with it. And my hope is that I can have more pain-free days than pain-filled days. I've had so many with pain that you get used to what you get used to. I mean, your threshold for pain increases, and so you can live with it. I'm thankful to say that right now I'm in just very mild pain these days, and I'm very thankful to report that. I know that can change at any time. I try not to think too much about what I will feel like 10 years from now or 20 years from now or 30 years from now if the Lord gives me that many years. And I don't have to, because I don't need that day's grace. I need today's grace. And so my hope is not in necessarily being healed this side of heaven. I know that's unlikely because of the nature of my disease. But my hope is, number one, in a resurrection. I think it's Don Carson that said, I'm not suffering from anything that a good resurrection can't fix. And I love that because it's true. My real life will start with a new body with Jesus, and I look forward to that. But number two, I firmly believe he will carry me until then. I know he will.
Does your disease indicate a shorter life than you might otherwise have?
Not necessarily. It can if you are completely untreated and not taking care of your body. It doesn't necessarily shorten your life, but it does drastically reduce the quality of your life as you age. And so I have to be really vigilant about the way that I eat and take care of my body and sleep when I can. Managing stress is one of the more difficult things. Autoimmune diseases are strange in that they are often triggered by stress, but then they also cause stress. And so you get stuck in a cycle that you can't get out of. And I don't know of any other kind of disease that responds to stress, maybe heart disease. You know, it's strange what your body can do to manage stress. And you cannot always remove stress outside of your body, your stressful circumstances. That's just life. Everyone has stress. And so the challenge is, what do I do with that? Do I worry, or do I pray? Do I come to the Lord? Do I make sure that there are believers speaking truth into my life, who are encouraging me in the scriptures, who are praying for me? All of those things are helpful. Medical help is helpful. Christian counseling is helpful. Like all of the things that we thankfully have access to, that I have access to, I take advantage of.
If I knew that I had something that stress would make worse, I would be stressed out about stress,
That's
right?
Very true.
Would be thinking, I got to make sure I'm not stressed out. So I got
Yes.
that would stress me out. Has this impacted how you relate to your kids?
My kids know that I have a disease, and they know that there are days where mom lays on the couch and she needs a little extra help. And they're very cautious around me then. They're also very concerned, which I appreciate. I love to see my kids when they have compassion. I feel like I can be honest with them, even at the ages that they're at, that I'm having a hard day pain-wise, and I need you to give mom a break, which is maybe too much to put on kids. My husband is a type 1 diabetic. They are used to having parents who have needs. And my prayer is that it will help them to grow into compassionate young men for whatever God has prepared for them, that it will give them compassionate hearts for others. They both have significant health issues themselves. So we spend a lot of time in doctors' offices, and we trust the Lord with our bodies. It has been helpful for my husband and me to be able to say to our children, I'm sorry that you have this issue. I'm sorry that you have this struggle, that you need this surgery. Your dad and I get it. Yeah. And we are trusting Jesus with our bodies. And that's all we can do is point them to Christ.
I can think of ways in which this could create strain in your marriage.
Yes, it could. I think my husband if he were sitting here, he would say he is not by nature a mercy person. He is merciful in his ways, but he would say that's not his gift. The last 2 years of our marriage, with my health just tanking the way that it did, really grew him in that area. And he was my lifeline. Prayed for me in the middle of the night, took me to expensive doctor's appointments, different kinds of appointments, anything we could find that might help. He was on board. And I know a lot of men that would not take leaps like that. And we have had a lot of different kinds of suffering in our life, ministry, infertility, decades of infertility, going through our son's adoptions, and for the Lord's kindness, whatever reason, the outside stress has unified us in marriage. And so we just took our health crises as one more thing that the Lord was going to use to teach us to love one another and to lay our lives down for each other.
I know what the question I'm about to ask you, I know what the right Sunday school answer is,
Okay.
And you do too. But I just want to know, be as honest as you can be in your own thoughts on this. If I could go back 10 years and say, there's this path that I could put you on that is pain-free. It will limit what you know about God, what you've learned about God through the pain path that you've been on. But it's pain-free. You can have that. Or you can have the pain path, and there'll be some sweet, rich stuff you'll learn about God in the process. Which path you pick?
It's a hard question because nobody wants pain. I don't want pain. I want to sleep all night. That's what I want. That's all I really want. But the reason it's such a hard question is because I would not know Christ the way I do now without pain. I would not cling to his promises like I have to. I have to take the pain path. I don't want the pain, but I want the growth. And I want the intimacy with Christ. Because if you take the pain-free path, but there's no intimacy with Jesus, then there's no point. Because it's him or nothing. And it has to be him. And the deepest seasons of growth in my life, of being so sure of who the Lord is, are in the valley, always. And so, while the Sunday school answer is to take the pain path, it is the path I would take again. And I don't say that lightly because sitting where I am today, I'm not in the pain that I was in even a year ago. And yet, who Christ is to me today is worth any painful path you have to take.